John Mason is his name. He's a Scottish MSP. And he posted on X, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they would have killed 10 times as many. If Israel wanted to commit genocide, they would have killed 10 times as many. And the SNP have kicked him out. They've withdrawn the whip from him over that comment alone. It followed a backlash from some of his colleagues, including one called Sandra White, who wrote, "You make me sick, John. The SNP should disown you as I have. We know what Israel's hoping to achieve. They're already committing genocide in Gaza." And that's cost him the party whip. The SNP have indeed disowned him, as Sandra White has, simply for saying that he doesn't believe that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. An SNP spokesman said to flippantly dismiss the death of more than 40,000 Palestinians is completely unacceptable. There can be no room in the SNP for this kind of intolerance. The chief whip has today withdrawn the whip from John Mason MSP with immediate effect pending internal parliamentary group due process. Have they gone mad? Have they completely and utterly lost the plot? Now, we can debate, and we have done endlessly, whether what is going on in Gaza does or doesn't constitute a genocide. My view on that is for the international courts to decide, not for people on social media or the radio or in the newspapers. Let's wait for the verdict. What is undeniable is that far too many innocent people are dead. That is an enormous, enormous tragedy, and it needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. But claiming that it's not a genocide, I utterly, utterly fail to see how that is intolerance, as the SNP spokesman puts it. I totally fail to see how that is flippantly dismissing the death of more than 40,000 Palestinians. He's not dismissing their deaths. He's not saying it doesn't matter. He might be saying it's absolutely atrocious. He might be saying it's even ethnic cleansing. What he's saying is it's not a genocide. How on earth have we got to a point where unless you say this is a genocide, even though no court of law has ruled that that is the case, you are guilty of flippantly, and I'm quoting again, flippantly dismissing the death of more than 40,000 Palestinians? He is stating a fact when he's not stating a fact because it hasn't been proven yet. But when he says he doesn't believe it's a genocide, no court of law has found that it is. So how on earth can you withdraw the whip from somebody who is simply stating his view on a matter of international foreign affairs and international law that no court has ruled on? Am I missing something here? How on earth is that flippantly dismissing the death of 40,000 Palestinians? Simply by saying, I don't believe it's genocide. 03456060973. Now, we can talk about whether or not it is or isn't a genocide, and of course that is going to come into this discussion. But my view on that is I don't know. I'm not an expert in international law. I'm not in Gaza. I don't have all the facts. And yes, I could see certain videos on social media and I could read certain things and I conclude whether it was or wasn't a genocide. But I think that would be wrong. In the same way, I think actually John Mason is wrong to say completely, utterly, he doesn't think it is. But how is that a sackable offence? 03456060973. The SNP accuses him of intolerance. Seems to me the only people displaying intolerance here is the SNP. For stripping the whip from someone who has said something that you might disagree with, and that's fine. You feel free to disagree with it. That's the society we live in, supposedly. But kicking him out the party simply for saying he doesn't believe it's a genocide? Mad, if you ask me. And actually quite sinister. Because we do have freedom of speech and we do supposedly have tolerance, and the SNP, I don't think, have demonstrated either of those things here. What am I missing? Am I missing anything, or do you agree? 03456060973. Let's talk to Angus MacNeil, former SNP for Nihilin and Year. I hope I pronounced that all right, Angus, from 2005 to 2024, who joins us live. Now, Angus, what do you make of these comments, and what do you make of the SNP's response? Good morning to you, because you've heard what my take on it is. Morning.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I was listening to your take there. Yeah, I mean, I think John Mason saying that, it's not a genocide. If it was, they would have killed 10 times more. So what do we do, John? Do we just sit back and wait for the 10 times more to be killed? And I was noting your points about courts deciding, but there were genocides before the international courts, or was the non-existence of courts not making these genocides? I think it's quite clear. I mean, there's a resignation letter from a British senior member of the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office today, who said senior members of the Israeli government and military have expressed open genocidal intent. We know the International Criminal Court are chasing them for war crimes and what have you. Israeli soldiers openly admit to rape and torture of prisoners, he says. Over half of Gaza's homes have been damaged or destroyed. And I think, as James O'Brien himself pointed out in LBC to a caller, perhaps this week, that if Hamas had been hiding in Tel Aviv, would the Israeli government have bombed the mayhem and the living daylights of Tel Aviv? Of course they wouldn't. And they were very reckless with the lives of people in Gaza. Now, that's what's happening there. What's happening in Scotland is the fact that the hierarchy of the SNP deemed it wise to go and meet an Israeli diplomat in the background of all that in the week when a father went off to register the birth of his twins and came back to the twins being dead, and I think the mother being dead and the mother-in-law being dead. And Scotland's name, in a way, being used by the representatives.
So do you disagree with that meeting taking place, Angus?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Very much. Because I don't think you should be meeting people who are representing a government or giving succour to people who are massacring daily.
How are you meant to pressure them to stop it? How are you meant? 80% of the schools. How are you meant
to? First, you stop engaging with them. You start to make them an international pariah. Giving them the carpet in decent company is not what Israel needs at the moment. Israel needs a shock, and particularly needs a shock from the United States of America.
That's not how politics
Rather
works,
than selling them guns to kill people, and they're selling them bombs to kill people, they should be told to stop it by everybody very clearly.
But how do you tell them to stop it if you refuse to meet them or speak to them?
Well, I think you've taken very clearly here what we're saying. I mean, there are channels where this is happening. But the channels where it's not happening are channels in Edinburgh were shaking their hands, or Washington, which are sending them bombs and guns and hardware to commit these daily atrocities on a civilian population. This is an undeniable fact, as you pointed out yourself, what is happening in Gaza. 80% of houses and homes are destroyed, or is it half, and 80% of businesses, hospitals, universities bombed to bits. I mean, they've attacked the people and the infrastructure of Gaza. And we know
I don't see how meeting with Israeli diplomats or politicians to express concern and urge them to stop what they're doing in Gaza. I struggle to see how that's not the role of politicians. I mean, last week Keir Starmer had a call with the president of Iran. We are appalled as a country by all sorts of things Iran's doing, but nobody says Keir Starmer should be ignoring the Iranians, because that's diplomacy, that's politics. You have to talk to people that you don't like and you don't agree with in order to try to pressure them to do what you do want them to do, don't you?
Well, I think if the Scottish Government had a locus on peace here or an international lever, that would be fine. We know full well what the Israelis are doing. They're looking for people to stand with, to talk with, decent people. People are not engaging in genocide at the moment. People who behave in a decent way, to try and hope somehow it rubs off on them with their dirty hands around the necks of poor innocent civilians, as we know in Gaza. So I think we should stay well clear of them. You know, there are ways to try and stop Israel doing this. It's clearly not worked in the last while because America keeps sending them weapons. You know, this is a huge problem, and there are people going to die this week because of what is happening there and because of the attitude of the West towards Israel. If Russia was to be bombing Gaza in the way Israel bombs Gaza, we would certainly be complaining, and rightly so. And I think what's happening in Gaza, somehow Israel are caught in the middle of the optic nerve of civilization, that they get off with far more than anybody else would. And I think to your original point, whether courts or not, I don't think there are any courts in place when the Armenian genocide took place, but I don't think anybody's going to go around and deny the Armenian genocide happened, you know? So we have to be very, very careful when we equate courts and genocide and everything else.
But there is a case. The difference is that there is a current case in front of the ICC. Now, we can argue about...
My point is there were genocides before there were courts.
But I'm fine, and you're welcome to say it is a genocide. Other people are welcome to say it isn't. My view is I don't know enough about the international law. I don't know enough about the facts on the ground. We've got a lot of propaganda and allegation and counterclaim from both sides. What I really do know is that I don't think this MSP simply saying he doesn't believe that what is going on in Gaza, however awful, is genocide, is, as an SNP spokesperson puts it, flippantly dismissing the death of 40,000 Palestinians.
I mean, I think perhaps you might have had a case if he said Israel are not committing genocide, full stop. Israel would be killing genocide if they committing genocide if they killed 10 times more. It's not the number in a genocide. I mean, there've been quite small genocides, and I can think of ones in South America actually perpetrated by Scottish people.
But again, Angus, you're welcome to disagree with him.
People were killed, and that was a genocide.
You're welcome to say he's wrong, but do you really think he's flippantly dismissing those deaths? Because that's a big claim from your former party spokesperson.
I have no idea what frame of mind John Mason was in when he wrote his tweet. But he certainly was getting the wrong end of the stick. And back to the point that's happening in Scotland at the moment, people are very unimpressed with the SNP hierarchy, and this is SNP membership who are unimpressed with the SNP hierarchy. And to alight on that single point, as John Mason did, I think is what really annoys many people. And has probably left him in the situation he's in. Look, the SNP is in a bit of a mess in the hierarchy at the moment. Angus Robertson met and shook the hands of the Israeli representatives while all this is going on, and this was green-lighted by John Swinney, the First Minister. Now, what John Mason has done is said something very crass or very stupid, but he hasn't met them or green-lighted.
Why is it crass?
Angus Robertson and John Swinney have bigger questions to answer than John Mason.
Why is it crass simply to say that he doesn't believe it's genocide? He hasn't said it's okay.
It's 10 times morbid. It's 10 times morbid. I mean, anybody can have a view on anything, but so what do? Do we sit back and wait for them to kill 10 times more? Because if you give Israel the weapons and the time and the space of their own choice, they probably would kill 10 times more. And you probably suspect that yourself, Ben.
But Angus, you're welcome to disagree with him. But what he's doing with that 10 times more comment is explaining why he doesn't believe it's a genocide. Now, you might say it's wrong. You might say it's misguided, as you have. You might say that's not the point. Why is that a sackable offence in the SNP's minds? Because
it's the flippancy of that last bit. It's the flippancy of that 10 times more. That's why. What are you going to do? Sit back and wait for them to kill 10 times more? This is the problem. And this is the problem that John Mason visited upon himself and really outraged membership. I'm not currently a member of the SNP, but I speak to enough members of the SNP that are very upset by the whole issue and John Mason deepening what was already a pretty bad issue that was kept quiet. Then when the SNP meet diplomats, they usually tweet it within a few hours. This one came out through the Israeli channel, so I think they probably knew themselves they shouldn't have been doing that, but they just couldn't resist the allure of a diplomat.
Angus,
and they met them, and they've really upset the membership very clearly.
Got to leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on. Angus MacNeil, former SNP MP for Nhilinin year from 2005 to 2024. Do you agree with what you just heard there? That he was being flippant. He was belittling and undermining the suffering in Gaza. And it's absolutely right, not only that he should have the whip suspended, but that members of the SNP should not be meeting Israeli diplomats. I mean, I disagree with Angus on those two things. I take his points about the genocide. He's entitled to think that. I can't say he's wrong. I can't say he's wrong. I can't disprove that. But I do think someone holding a different view saying, I don't think this is a genocide, I really do struggle to see why that's a sackable offence. I think that is a sign of intolerance and sort of thought crime, really, that the SNP need to sort of have a little look at themselves over. Because if you don't tolerate any dissenting voices or disagreements over a very, very contentious issue like this, then I don't really know what you're doing as a political party, to be honest.